All right, we're here at my tiny worm bin, and the last time we were in here, we fixed our moisture issue with this plastic you see here. But it's been 16 days since we fed last, so I want to show you what happens when I'm going to skip a feeding. So let's get right in here. And the first thing I notice is the plastic still has some moisture on it, so that's good. It's retaining moisture. And look at this. We had a full newspaper over here, and it is completely gone. We put some pulverized eggshells over the top and put that newspaper on top, and I think the combination of that kind of worm chow and the bedding, they just kind of eat it up. So if you see that in your worm bin, you feed worm chow, do they eat the bedding more? Go ahead and leave a comment and let me know what you think. So let's go ahead and see if there's anything left of that feeding. And we had strawberries and carrots. That was kind of the two main foods we put in here. And I, of course, don't see any of that. But what I do see are lots of worms and very moist bedding. This bedding feels absolutely fantastic. And I am in a fight with my air conditioner, which is just ripping the moisture out. But since I put that plastic on top, based on you all's comments, the moisture has really kind of retained in here, and it's just a constant good moisture for the worms in here. In fact, these worms are just doing great all over my fingers there. Let's go ahead and keep on digging. And I'm also noticing that a lot of the bedding is gone, and that makes sense because that's kind of been their food source after they got rid of the strawberries and carrots, was all the bedding that's in here. And my typical bedding is cardboard and newspaper shreds. And one of the other things I'm noticing right here is a little bit of the fibers of some broccoli that we had put in here. So let's go ahead and keep digging around and seeing how the rest of the bin is doing. This is a very tiny bin. It's only 3 gallons in volume, and it can get kind of out of whack if I've got it too dry or too wet. So I'm always checking it, especially the corners, to see how they're doing. And all throughout, just lots of worms. We started this with about 600 worms, and I think that is probably about as many as this bin can hold. We'll see after we go through this whole thing in about another 2 to 3 months, and we recount them to see if 600 is the max or if these worms keep populating and get more and more. But look at that, just a great consistency. And as you get more and more castings, you're gonna be able to retain moisture better. So when you start a bin with just mostly bedding, the moisture retention could be a problem if you are in the summertime and down south where your air conditioning is running constantly. In the winter, I actually have the opposite problem. My bins get way too moist and it's hard for me to maintain some dryness in them, and I just have to add more bedding. That's one of the things I want to talk about is bedding. When you haven't fed your worms in a while, they can actually survive pretty well just on the bedding. In fact, there's some species of worms that prefer bedding and will eat that more than you see in a typical red wiggler like this. So I'm just gonna air this out the rest, and I'll kind of fast forward it, and then we'll go ahead and start setting up a feeding zone for them. So one of the things you see me doing there is just kind of mixing whatever volume of bedding and castings I have in here all around. And that's because I feed right down the center every time. And getting in here and airing it out, making sure there's oxygen all throughout, no pockets of fermentation or, kind of ammonia smells in here, allows me to kind of mix everything that I have. Since I feed through the center, I can get that out to the edges, etc. So right down the middle is where we feed them, and we always start with some bedding. So let me do that. So in goes a kind of a generous amount of bedding, and I just put it in here dry. I haven't pre-soaked it or anything. That's because the foods that I feed is going to add a lot of moisture in here and kind of regulate it. So as I put in dry bedding, I add wet food, and that kind of keeps the moisture level the same throughout. And speaking of the food we feed them, I feed them my food scraps, and right now we have kind of summertime veggies and fruits, and right here some watermelon, and then I've got some cucumbers, I've got some strawberries, and I've got a little lettuce head. Now this looks like a lot of food, especially for 600 red wigglers, but I typically feed about every 7 days, and I'm not sure if I'm gonna be able to get back in here, so I'm gonna feed them a little bit more than I do, but all of this kind of shrinks down. The majority of this food right here is water, so this just really isn't a whole lot of food for them when you think about it. So I'm just gonna add this in here. And they really enjoy the watermelon. The watermelon is an absolute fast food. Cucumber, same thing, and strawberries. So this is all very fast food that I'm feeding them here. And I typically will see this food gone in about, 4 to 5 days. And by the time I come in here, I might see a little bit of the greenery here on the strawberries. But for what I'm showing here, this will typically be gone in about 4 to 5 days. Now, with the extra volume of it that I have, it may last a little bit longer. Now, in addition to regular food scraps, I also feed them some coffee grounds and tea grounds. And this is just what we have every day, just a little bit of coffee. I add it into this bin right here. It actually gets a little bit of mold and other microbes in it. So what you see here is probably on average about 2 to 3 weeks old. And then I've been adding pulverized oats to my bins, and this is just kind of a worm chow. You can add any kind of grains that you want. I just pulverize them in this little magic bullet blender, and it does really well. I've got affiliate links if you're interested in seeing how much they cost, but they're really inexpensive. And I use it to grind my coffee and my eggshells and my kind of worm chow that I feed. And if you do eggshells, it may create a cloudiness on here. So just to kind of warn you, I don't do my eggshells in here, but it can get it cloudy with the micro scratches that eggshells produce. So another thing with this is you want to kind of do it light. You do not want huge amounts or clumps because then the worms really can't get in and it dries out. And then finally, we're going to add some eggshells. And this is just kind of grit for them to use in their digestion. They have gizzards, so they kind of grind their food up in order to get it smaller. So I just add a little bit of sprinkling of this on every feeding. So there you go. There's kind of a typical feeding for this tiny worm bin. Again, 600 worms, probably on the larger side of feeding. So if you have 100 worms, you really do not want to feed this much food to it. You want to go a lot lighter. And if you have 1,000, 2,000 worms, then obviously, you know, double or triple it here. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of cover this up. And on top of that, I'm going to add some more of those pulverized oats, and then I'm going to add a new piece of newspaper. I was really impressed with how quickly they ate that newspaper after I had sprinkled the top with pulverized oats. So I want to try that again. And if you're enjoying this video, I appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe. If you want to see more videos, I've got an outdoor worm bin and a worm tower, which absolutely I manage way differently than this tiny worm bin that doesn't have any drainage in it at all. This worm bin is really excellent for like an apartment or, you know, a household that only has 1 or 2 people in it. You can really get your food scraps and kind of your paper waste or cardboard waste going with it. Let's go ahead and put some pulverized oats on here. Using kind of a worm chow or these pulverized oats has kind of been new to me in the last about 6 months or so. And I've been really impressed with it. My worms seem to enjoy it a lot. They go through it really quick. I think it's fattening them up. I don't know. But what I've seen is that it also helps them to eat the bedding much quicker. So that's just kind of a theory I have just based on what I'm seeing. So if you see that too, let me know in the comments so I can see if it's kind of just my bin or if it's kind of wishful thinking on my part. But let's go ahead and get that newspaper down now. So here we go, just a dry piece of newspaper. I'm going to put it on top, and for me, usually this is all that I really need to kind of let the moisture get up and then kind of sink back down, just a little piece of newspaper. But because it's summertime and I'm having a little bit of trouble with moisture coming out of my bin, I'm going to go ahead and continue to put the plastic on. So here we go with the plastic. And that will do it for our feeding. So I hope everybody's having a great day, and happy vermicomposting, everybody. Take care now.